Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. My name is Evan McCauley, president of the club, and we are thrilled to have you joining us today. This meeting broadcast is available on HCTV as well as our Rotary of Hudson YouTube channel. Our club meets weekly at Laurel Lake for breakfast on Wednesday mornings from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. Come out and join us for a meeting. We'd love to have you as a guest. To learn more about Rotary, our club, and the impact that we are having on the local community and world, please visit rotaryhudson.org. Enjoy the meeting today and be the inspiration.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests.
Good morning, Ron.
Welcome to the Rotary Club of Hudson. I'm Ron Strobel, the Sergeant at Arms. Our invocation this morning is by Jim Ahern. Please bow your heads.
This is a prayer from Margaret Mead. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever was. Let us be thankful for the small groups of committed people who, with your help, are changing the world. One lunch, one water well, one donation, one polio vaccine, one medical intervention, one scholarship, one dental filling, one community project at a time. Let us be thankful for the opportunity to gather together for a good meal with good friends and reflect on the good we have done, are doing, and will do. In God's name, let us be thankful.
Amen.
And to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test, Joe Zapatowski.
Join me in the pledge. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now the four-way test. First,
Is it the truth?
second,
Is it fair to all concerned?
third,
Will it build goodwill and better friendships?
fourth.
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. I don't know why the eagle had his back turned to us this morning, but now it's straightened out. To lead us in song, Chris Barker.
Good morning, Rotarians and guests. In honor of the Indians clinching the AL League, take me out to the ball game. Ready?
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never get back. Let me root for the Indians. If they don't win, it's a shame. Over it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Great job.
Thank you, Chris. Now our president, Evan McCauley.
Good morning, fellow Rotarians. Everyone looks like they're having a great morning. Thank you to James Field for getting the AV set up this morning. Everything is working just well this morning. Den Rich was here bright and early, slaving away. So thanks, guys, for getting everything going. We're going to have Chris Barker announce our guests and then get underway this morning.
Good morning again.
Good morning,
Well, I'm pleased to announce that our friends from the service learning class are here today. So if they can just wave or stand up when we announce their names. But we have Lonnie Banner, Marty Bach, Jamie Cosman, and Brittany Amier. And then we also have two of their students with us, Kayla and Ayano. So thank you for being with us today.
And I just love the invocation this morning, talking about focusing on the good that we're doing. And we're going to kick it off this morning by focusing on the good. We're going to have Gail Royster and Ron Strobel come forward. And we have a special announcement, a special grant that we're going to be giving today to our service learning students. Gail?
Thank you, President Evan. Before I get into that, I just wanted to tell you I got a call this week from Bob Hills. You remember we passed a card around and everyone signed it because of his 90th birthday. So he called just to express his gratitude over and over and over again. He was so touched by it. So just wanted you all to know that. Okay, back to the gala from last May. As you all know, one of our perennial beneficiaries of the gala is the service learning class. And although we presented the real money to them earlier this summer, we also want to take this opportunity to invite the entire table up to the front, and we're going to present for PR purposes, the big check to them. So please come on up. Where's our photographer? Oh, he's sitting right there. He's always ready.
Okay.
Well, not in front of the podium.
Right, we don't want that.
We want to get home.
Look at that. Look at that.
Oh, my
What a girl.
Let me move this chair. Unless somebody wants to sit. Oh, right. One low. Good work.
Thank you. And we're going to let them stay up here. And Lonnie, do you want to take over?
Sure.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's so nice to see all of you. I hope you had a wonderful summer. We just, first of all, want to say thank you for your generous donation. This year, we're going to be using it for a couple of things. Number one, with Harbor Light Hospice, which actually Jay's granddaughter, Allie, is doing her community service there with us. They're looking for bags for veterans, so veterans in hospice, giving them some little care packages. And then also, we've been working with the Rape Crisis Center of Summit County, and they're looking for some care kits. So when women and men, if they're assaulted, when they go in to get their examination, they can have, new clothing, a blanket, some snacks, things like that, because they have to give all of their clothing up when they're going through the evidence process. So those are two of the ways that we're going to be using this grant. That we're going to be having our students do with Camp Ledgewood coming up. So, and I'll get you more information on that soon. But we have two wonderful students here today who are here to talk to you about their service experience. We've got the beautiful Ayano and the beautiful Kayla, and whoever would like to go first, you're up.
Good morning. My name's Kayla Lotz. I'm at Hudson Middle School with the special needs kids. I have two aunts with Down syndrome who live in Arizona, and I don't get to see them that often, but I do have a very close and special bond with them. So being able to be with the special needs kids has really opened my eyes up again and really made me remember that connection, especially that I had when I was younger with them. And it's all the aides there are trying to convince me to go into special education now, so that is something that I'm considering. But it also has really reminded me about how important each person is, no matter their disability, no matter what they have. They are all human, then they are all perfect no matter what. And sometimes, I get very nervous because everyone is so unique and everyone is so different. And I constantly like, oh my gosh, am I doing the right thing? Am I helping them enough? But ultimately I realize it's just love that I need to show to them, and I've done enough. So, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ayano Nakamura, and I'm also part of Service Learning, and I've been here helping videotape. So my site is actually here at Laurel Lake, and I'm in Crown Center, and the best thing that I've gotten out of it is honestly just being able to make a connection with these people that without service learning I probably never would have been able to meet or talk to or get to know. And while it's kind of hard when they don't really remember who I was when I come back every time, it's those little moments when they kind of recognize me or when we both share a joke. They tend to remember my dog really well. So those small moments mean a lot to me, especially when I'm there. And every time I go back, it makes me so happy. And even if I had a really bad morning, it makes my day just to go to my site. And I just also want to thank everyone here for sponsoring me to go to RILA this past June. So thank you.
It'd be great to hear what their plans are after school.
Talk about potential plans for next year. Where do you think about going majors?
So I'm planning on going to OSU. That's my top pick right now. I was planning on studying secondary education with a focus in English, and now I'm kind of like, oh no, maybe I should do something with special education, because that's something that's been on like the back burner my whole life. But OSU does have both has a fantastic education program, so I'm hoping that after talking to my advisor, I think I'm going to start with secondary education and then hopefully go into something in special education. So.
Great.
Well, I've actually been helping with music therapy a lot while I've been here, and I'm planning on majoring in music performance, probably viola performance, and my top pick right now is either Juilliard or Rice, so that's what I'm planning on doing.
Any other questions?
So, do you actually bring your dog here too?
I do, every Tuesday.
That is wonderful. Wonderful.
What kind of a dog?
She's a Cavachon, so it's a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel and a Bichon mix.
Oh my God.
Any more tokens with
Well, thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that is just wonderful. And I just wanted to let you all know that our theme this year, the Rotary theme, is Be the Inspiration. And I think that from my point of view, I see that the work that you all are doing with service learning really rubs off on us. And thank you for being our inspiration. So keep it up. Moving forward, membership. We have a little bit to get caught up here. Richard Nebbiolo is going to come forward. Rich Warfield, if he'd like to come forward as well. There's one member in here that we let slip through the cracks. I apologize. Bill Benoit. He's been with us for quite some time now, and he's been quite involved with the club. He's helped out with the picnic that we had, and he's here, he's active, and we look forward to the impact and the leadership that Bill is going to bring to the table. So Bill, come on forward here. We have Bill's gold badge, and one thing that we've done recently on the membership committee is add Richard Nebbiolo. He's taking charge in helping new members get acclimated to the club and helping them work through the gold badge checklist. So we thought it would be appropriate for him to award Bill with that badge this morning. So join me in welcoming Bill Benoit with his full Rotary badge.
All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks, Evan. All right.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. A couple more announcements here. Jim Ahern, we have a special update regarding the new Interact Club at Western Reserve Academy.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah.
By the way, I have a Cavachon, and they are the best dogs. If you're looking for, aren't they? They're smart. Earlier this summer, we were contacted by our district office, and that Western Reserve was interested in Interact, mainly because they had a couple of goals. Starting this year, they wanted to form some more relationships in the community and dedicate efforts to supporting a nonprofit organization or two. So they did their homework. Rotary Interact came out as something they wanted to take part in. I think you were first contact, and Devin and I met with Wanda Bosch, who is going to be the director of their Interact program. And just to say where we're at, we've had a few meetings, and they've had their first meeting. They had sign-ups, and they had 59 students wanted to sign up. Too many. And so it's 26. They've had one meeting, and they've elected a president who's a senior, a junior who's vice president, a treasurer who's a sophomore, and a freshman is their secretary. And so starting, they're going to start meetings on Wednesdays at 9:30, and next Wednesday, hopefully Allison and I, who has also been a coordinator with me, will be attending that meeting and just giving them an overview of Rotary, and you get them to start building that relationship. So more to come later. We're kind of building the bridge as we're walking on it here with this, because we don't have anybody here, but in contact with Chelsea, and how do you pronounce her last name? Talty. She is the new district coordinator for Interact programs throughout the district. So we'll be working with her and try to get this program going. That's it.
Thank you, Jim. Brown's fundraiser coming up here throughout the end of the year. I think that it would be awesome if we could have one or two of us from the club supporting that cause. I'll probably attend the November 4th event, so feel free to connect with me if you'd like to join me on November 4th, or if you have some family that would like to be involved, connect with me on how to register. We have a foundation meeting following this club meeting. We're going to be meeting in the Greenwood private dining room, I believe. And the foundation is our charitable arm. It's how we're able to give and make grants and make a huge impact. So feel free to come join us if you'd like to learn more. There's a lot of awesome things going on. Grants being discussed, planned giving committees being started. So we're going to have that meeting following this meeting. Are there any other announcements for the good of the club this morning? Wonderful. Well, we'll get right into our program this morning. Again, we're continuing with the theme of planning and protecting, taking charge. And we're going to have Mike Swain come forward this morning to introduce our guest speaker.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'd like to introduce to you this morning Michael Romito. Michael is a second-generation owner and vice president of Johnson Romito Funeral Homes. Johnson Romito operates funeral homes in Hudson and also Twinsburg, Northfield, and Bedford. Michael is a graduate of Bedford High School. He attended The Ohio State University. Did I say that right with the and all that? Yeah. And he finished his education at the Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science. A second-generation funeral director since 1987. Michael is married. He has 2 children, and he lives in Aurora, Ohio. So let me introduce to you Michael Romito.
Morning, everyone. Thank you.
Morning.
Well, in keeping with your theme this month about preparing and protecting, planning, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our funeral home, our business, and some steps you can go through to plan for the future and the inevitable. Johnson Romito Funeral Home started here in Hudson as Donald B. Johnson and Son Funeral Home. First as Donald B. Johnson Funeral Home in 1927, opened here at the facility in Hudson. They had been in Bedford since 1913. Donald B. Johnson had 2 sons. Jim Johnson lived here in Hudson, ran the Hudson operation. His son Marty lived in Bedford and ran the operation there. In 63 and 68, they acquired, or built the funeral home in Northfield in 63, acquired the funeral home from an existing funeral home in Twinsburg in 1968. Jim Johnson, in the mid-70s, developed cancer and basically did not want to leave the business to try to figure out what to do with it to his children. So that gave my dad an opportunity to purchase the business from the Johnsons with the silent partner. My dad did work for the funeral home since he was in 9th grade. Started off just after high school working, been involved with the funeral home since 1957. In 77, he was able to purchase it, as I said. In the mid-90s, my sister Debbie and myself bought out my dad's silent partner, and it is solely owned by the Romito family now. So that's just a little history on our funeral home. Big question I get is, none of the Johnsons are involved. Why do you keep why is the name still there? My dad, he gives a lot of credit for what he got to the Johnsons. And they did a lot for him, guided him along a path. And as a tribute to them, we've always decided to keep the name. It's been so long now, we have a brand. So even once my dad is gone, we probably won't drop the name just because of the history that we have. So we'll get on with the presentation here for talking about planning. There's basically 3 steps to planning that folks do with us. The first step is they come into the funeral home, or sometimes just send us the information, and it's basically vital statistics information and their wishes. And that's always a good step. Second would be actually to meet with us, sit down, and actually select funeral merchandise, things that would be significant to what type of plans they want, be that a casket or an urn, just all depending on their wishes. Kind of the third step would be to fund that pre-need, or prepay as it's sometimes called. There are advantages to doing that. It does lock in the prices of our funeral home. Things that we have control over are guaranteed. And basically the way we do that is that money's placed into a trust or an insurance policy that we hope earns enough interest to offset inflation. If it does not, we make up that difference at the time. Some folks choose to do that. Other folks say we've got plenty of investments, plenty of life insurance. We're fine with just getting our plans down. And that's good. A good start is to come in and meet with us. But probably the best start is just talking with your family. And I was mentioning earlier at our table, the funeral organization groups, cemeteries, cremation societies, funeral homes, first time they ever got together as a coordinated group was to promote a theme of the talk of a lifetime. And basically that's just sitting down with your family members and discussing what your wishes are for your funeral or not funeral. It just depends. Everybody's different. And the big thing about that is that just gives them some guidance. There are so many times I sit down with families and they look and they say, we don't know what to do. We just give us our options because Dad never said what he wanted. And a little history, when I started with the funeral home over 30 years ago, 90% of our funerals ended in burial. 10% were cremation. So you go back to that time, it was almost everybody was going to a cemetery and being buried. Now we're about 50% burial, 50% cremation. So you've got a lot of choices out there. Burial choices there's even different things you can do with burials. You can have a viewing, a service, and then a burial. something that's sometimes referred to as a traditional funeral. I say there's no traditional funerals anymore. It's kind of what people want to do. We have people coming up with new ideas all the time. Some other options are viewing, then have a graveside service, which we do sometimes where it's private with just the family, and then they go to church for a memorial service. They want that to be a little more of a celebration, not be focused on a casket up front. And then there's some folks that just want to have that service at church with the casket, not have a viewing, and then do the burial, and others that just want to have a graveside service. That brings us to cremation. With cremation, your choices are even more so. Your choices there, you can have a viewing still, which a lot of people don't realize. Have that service, and then instead of going to the cemetery, we would end in cremation. Other times, people don't want that viewing. They want to have the cremation take place first, and then have a memorial service. Other folks don't want that religious service, but they want a time for people to come and gather and pay their respects. So they'll still do what we've termed a memorial gathering, where they'll meet at the funeral home, just like you would if there was a casket there, maybe 2 to 4, 6 to 8, or 5 to 8 in the evening. Kind of the hours are all over, just depending on what the family wants. And they'll have pictures set up, things like that, just to give people a chance to come and pay their respects to the family and that. And there are other folks that want to have just services or cremation service and not have a service at all. And again, that's a personal choice. They just choose not to have anything. They maybe do something as a family, or they may do nothing at all. And again, it's just a personal preference with that. The big question with cremation is, what do people do with the urn or sometimes ashes? Because you don't have to have the urn. You don't need an urn in all cases. Some people choose to scatter. And that's probably the biggest question we get, is that legal? Every state is a little bit different on their laws. Here in Ohio, it's very vague. It says you cannot scatter on somebody else's private property. Now, what is private property? Is the green in Hudson private property? It's public space. Is Lake Erie private property? The metro parks. My biggest thing to people is be discreet. Be very discreet. I tell a couple of stories. One, I did not realize the former owner of the golf course is sitting at my table today, but someone did years ago scatter at Boston Hills Golf Course, and of course took the box with our funeral home name and put it in the garbage can there, as I was told. And in the morning, this pile of what back then was not just what we would consider ashes now. They didn't have the processing in that. There were some bigger pieces in that. So obviously, that did not go over well. We went out, gathered up what we could, and they put the sprinklers on, and you know. So that's why I say discreet. More recent story, I had a friend of mine who scattered. His dad loved the Institute up at Chautauqua. So he goes out on the dock, and they happen to be having a wedding, and places the ashes into the water, which forms this big white cloud. So now a crowd gathers around. What do you think's happening? He's a fisherman, came up with a very good, I think there's fish spawning here. And the people said, oh, and he quickly walked away. So again, discretion is what I always kind of try to preach when it comes to that. Some people choose to keep ashes at home, and that's not as popular as people think. We see on TV a lot the urn on the mantle or that. Sometimes folks choose to keep them at home. Sometimes it's the spouse keeping them at home until the second spouse passes, and then the family are instructed to do something with them together. That happens a lot. I always tell people, especially if there's no children or that, you have to think about what's going to happen with that urn when you finally, decide on your wishes in that. So keeping them at home is not as popular as it would be made out in the media. Other things you can do is inter at a cemetery or place in a niche, and a niche is just a small crypt, let's say, where there's sometimes single niches where one urn can go in, sometimes they're double niches. Basically, that's, what your choices are when you have a cremation as far as that goes. That leads into cemetery choices. A lot of people, this is part of that planning. Where do we ultimately want to be? And in our area here, you have a lot of choices. City of Hudson has a great asset in their city cemeteries. They're some of the nicest kept city cemeteries that we deal with. Locally, there's Markilly and St. Mary's Cemetery. They're basically the same cemetery that started off two, and the city took them over. St. Mary's Cemetery years ago used to be run by St. Mary's Church, and now the city takes care of both. And there's Draper Cemetery also, which is on 303 here in Hudson. That's an older cemetery. I'm not sure as far as if there are actually plots available in that cemetery still, and that would be something you'd have to check with the city about that. And a lot of people call us and say, we need to get a grave at Markilly, thinking we have to do that. That's the city. The city runs the selling of the graves. There's different sections that are available in that. We have some private cemeteries in our area. All Saints Cemetery would be another Catholic cemetery, which is in Northfield, but they will accept any denomination. You do not have to be Catholic to be interred there. The other cemetery would be Crown Hill Cemetery on 91 in Twinsburg. Crown Hill used to be family owned like our funeral home. Like in our industry, as funeral homes got by big corporations, Crown Hill is also owned by a big corporation now. New, when I say new, relatively new to our area, opened in the late 90s for veterans, is Ohio Western Reserve National Cemetery. And that's become a real asset to us here. The closest national cemetery before that was in Dayton. And if you were a veteran and wanted to go to a national cemetery in Ohio, you had to go down to Dayton. To be honest, we didn't go to Dayton very much at all. It was just too far of a travel. So they opened up, it's in Rittman, Ohio, Ohio Western Reserve National Cemetery. The first time we went down, I didn't think we'd go down very often, because it's about a 35-minute drive down. But as people started going down and seeing the cemetery and what it has to offer, it's a beautiful place. If you haven't been there, it's worth the drive just to visit and see it. And if you're a veteran and are eligible, there are some eligibility requirements, and it basically has to do with service time. Some veterans were in for a couple of months and then discharged for various reasons, so we always have to make sure that they're able to be accepted there. That's something that the National Cemetery Office, we send them the discharge paper, or DD-214. And that I can't stress enough for any veterans that are in the room, or if you know a veteran. That is our biggest struggle we have when we meet with a family, is we need dad's or mom's discharge paper, and they don't know where it's at. And their immediate response is, we'll go to the VA and get it for us. Well, I've requested from the VA discharge papers and got them 6 months later. They don't work very fast. Their main records, they had a fire. A lot of the World War II discharge papers were destroyed, so they basically recreate the person's service record. So it takes some time. So I tell, if you don't have it or don't know where it, start now. You can request that from the VA, and they'll send it directly to you, and let your loved ones know where that copy's at. And if you do pre-planning with us, that's when we ask for that and we put that in the file. It's just good for us to have. Even if you're not going to the National Cemetery, you're entitled to things. Representative from your service, meaning the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, they come out and do a presentation of the flag and play taps. But the key to getting that is having a discharge paper or separation record. So that is one of the biggest things, especially for our veterans, to do. With that, other information that we need is basically vital statistics information. And these are good things to go over with your family, because some of the things are names that haven't been heard or spoke of for a while. As people have gotten the genealogy bug, it's gotten a little easier. But basically, we need, for the death certificate at the time, social security number, date and place of birth, parents' names. And parents' names can be the trip up sometimes. Everybody knows the dad's name and his last name, or if it's could be the mother's maiden name, obviously. But it's the mother of the person that passed away, his maiden name, which is sometimes hard for people to remember. If the person that passes away is in their 90s, you know, that's a name that may not have been spoken of in the family for an awful long time. So those are things that we ask for at the time. Other things we get is family names for obituary. Now, we do that on the pre-planning, but then at the time, things change a lot. There's always more great-grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren. Brothers or sisters pass away. Or with children, divorces happen, or sometimes children pass away. So we always review that at the time of a death that we do on a pre-arrangement. So those are really the main things that we do when people are pre-planning. The other thing I tell people to do when they're having this talk with their family is to go over their own things, their financial things. These are things that the funeral home doesn't need, but the family needs. You know, where your bank accounts are at, what life insurance you have, investments. My dad, obviously from being in the business, there is a folder, and all three of the kids know where that folder is. And it has everything, and they update that constantly as things change. And that's very good. You know, when we have a sudden death of somebody that's younger, you know, maybe in their 50s or 60s, I'll sit down with the spouse and she'll say, you know, he took care of everything. I don't know where anything is. What advice can you give me? You know, it's basically, again, just trying to piece things together. You look at tax returns, things like that. But if there is some organization, it makes it a lot easier for that family to work through things in that. Who your attorney is, things like that. Obviously, you know, everybody would think that having a will is just something people have or do. I've got friends of mine that are very successful business people, my age, even a little bit older. They had a will when their kids were born. Their kids are 30s or 40s now. They haven't updated their will. You know, it's just one of those things you kind of forget about and don't think about. So those are kind of important things for that, help your family towards the end there in those decisions. That talk of a lifetime that I mentioned, that's, I think, the best thing that you can do as families, sit down. And kids sometimes don't want to talk about it. Parents sometimes don't want to talk about it with their kids. But it's getting a little bit easier as we hear more and more about it. When we see people start thinking about prearranging is usually in their 70s. I don't have many people in their 50s or 60s come in and say, I want to meet with you. But all of a sudden you start to see they're going to more and more funerals, and they start thinking about it. Prepaying or pre-funding sometimes becomes a necessity as people start spending down their assets later in life as they're paying for maybe assisted living or a nursing home. That's probably one of the biggest triggerers of people prepaying funerals, is to put money aside for the funeral that doesn't get counted towards an asset, so that if they do spend down all their assets and apply for Medicaid, then that money's not counted as an asset and is set aside. Medicaid allows funeral spending to be one of the things you're allowed to do. And that basically helps the family. Prior to 1986, Medicaid didn't let you do that. So basically you spent all your money paying for long-term care, and the burden of paying for the funeral fell on the family. So you can fund that different ways. You can do it with an existing insurance policy by making that irrevocable, paid to the funeral home just for the funeral, or if it's cash that you have because you sold a house or something like that, basically we would put that money into an irrevocable trust. And irrevocable is the word that the state wants. They want it set aside for the funeral. Now, irrevocable doesn't mean not transferable. That's the biggest thing people always question us about. What if Johnson Romito Funeral Home isn't here? Basically, that money is put into a trust, and it's regulated by the state, and it's set aside there for the safety. And the state has tightened up those rules on that. Every once in a while, you'll hear of a funeral home that took people's money to prepay for their funerals, but didn't trust the money. And as long as that owner was giving them the funeral, nobody knew really the difference. Unfortunately, as owners got older, they sell the funeral home, the new owner comes in and a family walks in and says, I've got a prepaid funeral. He has no money set aside for that. So that's happened in a few rare cases, but the state has done some things to tighten that up. You no longer make a check out to the funeral home. It's made out to the actual trust. Basically, then you get notification that it's in there. The problem is, unless you're at a speech like this, the general public doesn't know that. It's not out there yet as these regulations. So there can still be some unscrupulous people out there. So you always want to make sure that it is going to a trusting company when you do that. I know whenever I give a speech or a talk, I always have a lot of questions, and they can be on pre-planning or any question or experience you had, and you want some clarification or that. Does anybody have any questions?
Michael, is there a structure or a pre-planning worksheet that people can follow?
Basically, we have pre-planning guides. I have a couple of different ones that we're happy to give to you. One is just a basic sheet that has the information that we need. It gives you the vital statistics, things like that. I also have another very nice book that basically allows you to organize some of your things, bank accounts, life insurance. And people, when we give that out, they get panicked. Why do you need this information? And that's why I say, no, that's not for me. That's what you can to give to your kids. And we do have those available to you. And anytime anybody would want one, all you have to do is give us a call. There is a pre-planning guide that kind of gives you some basic. As we've got into technology, it is on our website. Some people like to fill that out and send that in to us. It comes to us via email. Again, we start that file. There's contact information. Those will come in, and I'll call them and say, do you want to get together? Or email them back, and they say, no, we just wanted you to have our information. So there's different ways you can do it. Some people want to come in and sit down and just talk about and get pricing and things like that, and we send them home with those guides. Now, as technology's gotten out there with more and more people emailing in that, we get a lot of requests. Can you email me? This is what I'm thinking of services. Can you email me some basic costs? And then we would send that planning sheet with it. So happy to do that for you. I've got a lot of business cards, and I'm happy to pass those out to you. Yes?
More and more here at Laurel Lake, we have people wanting to have a memorial service right here in the community room.
Yes.
Also, more and more I understand that Cleveland Clinic, for example, is offering to receive body donations for research.
Correct.
In the event that more and more people do this, what is the role of Johnson Romito?
With basically the body donations, that's a really good question. Number one, you have to you have to get pre-approved for that. And they don't take certain illnesses, things like that. Basically, I just had my wife's aunt, she was going to donate to the Cleveland Clinic, her body. That was her wishes. She was very frugal. Even though they had a funeral director in the family, she was looking to save her family some dollars. And she wanted to have her body donated, and then it would be cremated and the ashes returned to the family. The family chose not to do it because they weren't going to get the ashes back for a year. And that was just their choice. Basically, they didn't want in a year to have to kind of go through things again of interring those ashes and that. I have other people that do that, and what's the role of Johnson Romito? We're not involved. Sometimes people will call us and say, we don't have a church or a facility like Laurel Lake. We want to do a memorial service. Can we use your facility for that? And obviously, we help them do that. Some of the donation, be it there's Neocom, which is in Rootstown, Case Western Reserve, and the Cleveland Clinic are the ones that are close to us for body donations. Some of them suggest to people, plan for a cremation also. And you can prepay that even if you wish. Just in case something changes and at the time we don't accept you as a donation, you have something planned. I had a friend of mine's grandmother that did that. She lived till she was 105 years old. To be honest, I didn't think they were going to take her because of her age. They really wanted her because of her age. And in that case, they did a memorial service at our funeral home. She was not under any type of assistance such as Medicaid or that. For that, we just gave the money back to the family. And that brings up a point I should have made earlier. When you do prepay and become on Medicaid, Medicaid regulates that funeral, that money's set aside for the funeral. And what we have is we have people that have prepaid, let's say 20 years ago, and they wanted a full burial and have a service in that. Now mom's changed her mind and she wants to be cremated. So obviously the dollar differences are great. Well, if she was under Medicaid, I cannot give that money directly back to the family. It has to go back to the estate of Mrs. Smith. Well, the biggest problem is when you've spent all your assets down, you don't have an estate. So what's the family do with that check? So then we have to take that check and send it back to the state attorney general to the Medicaid Recovery Fund. And so that would be the only difference in giving money back. But that's a very good question about that. They can only accept so many people, so I don't think our role in that is just basically depends on the family's preference. When the death occurs, you don't call us. They give you a specific number to call, and they come to the place of death, transport to the medical school, and do what they have to do to prepare that cadaver, as they would call it at that point, to be used for research and medical students and things like that. And it's very important. When I was in mortuary school, that's how we learned anatomy. We had 2 cadavers that came to the mortuary school that we learned on. So, yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about the range of expenses?
Range of expenses really just depend on the type of service you want. Basic cremation, to give you kind of a ballpark range, without any type of servicer that, you'd be looking at, depending on earning that, $2,500 to $3,000 at our funeral home. Going to full burial, our basic service fee is $4,960, and that would be for that traditional service that I said. Viewing, service, then burial. In addition to that, you would have the casket and burial vault, and that's where your biggest jump comes in. I have caskets that range in price from $1,050 to up over $30,000. Now, when you come into our funeral home in Hudson, you're not going to see a $30,000 casket. If you want to see a casket that's over $30,000, it was the casket that Aretha Franklin was in. They called it a gold-plated casket. It was a misnomer. It was a polished bronze casket. The hardware was gold-plated. And from what I heard, the funeral home that sold that casket price was about $54,000. So you can spend in a wide range. I get a lot of people call me and say, what's a burial cost these days? And I would say average, when you include cemetery costs, $10,000 to $12,000 would be average. Obviously, you can be below that and you can be above it. But I like to give a figure that includes everything. A lot of times you can get just what the funeral home's fees are, and then all of a sudden you're going to, let's take Crown Hill for an example. It's $1,500 to dig the grave. Where City of Hudson, it's about $880. So again, you just have a lot of variables in there. Biggest cost that people are shocked about are newspaper notices. Plain Dealer is running, our average notice is about $400, and that's family names and service times. Those people that write life stories, I have it cost up to, I've had them be $1,000 in the Plain Dealer. Just when I think that's expensive, we just put a notice in the New York Times. $58 a line. Our notice was 10 lines, which basically had the person's name, our funeral home information to get them to our website, and it was $580. So that is one of the bigger costs. You get a paper like the Hub Times. Their basic notice is $78, and as it gets longer, I've never had one be over $150. Problem you run with the Hudson, with the paper, is it's bi-weekly. So if it's a Monday at 2 o'clock deadline for Wednesday's paper, if I'm meeting with somebody at 3 o'clock on a Monday and they're having a Friday funeral, obviously it's not going to get in the paper on Wednesday, but it will be on their website. They put it on their website right away. So most people still choose to put it in. Even people that don't have services have been asking me to put in notices. I had a gentleman that said he didn't want any notices. His wife didn't want an announcement in the paper. And he called me up and said, can we put a small notice in the Hub? And when I asked him, what changed his mind, he got tired of being in the grocery store and people asking him how his wife was doing because they knew she was sick, because nobody knew she passed away. So even folks that choose not to have services usually put something in the local paper because it still is a reasonable way of getting the message out there. As more and more people are on the internet, our website is utilized a lot. I've got families that decide they don't want to incur that newspaper cost, and they'll just put a notice on our website, and through social media, Facebook and emailing family and that, you know, we've had no notices and had a memorial service and 100 people show up just with a notice on our website. So things are changing. You know, the Plain Dealer only delivers, you know, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that's kind of changed us a little bit. It's more and more people though are looking at that cleveland.com and you get all the notices on there, you know, 7 days a week. So things have changed a lot since I started 30 years ago, and I only imagine how my dad's been since, he's been licensed since 1963, so he's seen a lot more change than me. So a lot of people ask about my dad, Ed. Still involved. He's 76. I call him semi-retired just because I can't get him to fully retire, so that's kind of our little family joke, but enjoy having him around. Are there any other questions? We've got one more.
This is just a comment. As a recent user of your services, one of the most useful things that I had was the checklist that's part of the notebook. It says, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this, in that order. And then there's a whole list of other things, information that you need to acquire. It's the list of the, you know, the lawyers and the bank accounts and all that stuff. And we were pretty well organized, but that was still extremely useful.
Thank you. What she's referring to is when someone has a death, we give them a checklist, and it kind of walks you through what you have to do. Contacting Social Security, what you need when you call the insurance companies, things like that. But we also put in a lot of helpful information. Some grief organizations, some other things about getting organized yourself as a widower, power of attorney, things like that, just to help people kind of get organized to go through things. And this is given after the death has occurred. And we found it very helpful to our families. So thank you very much for that comment. Thank you very much.